America. To hear spoken her name invokes not an image simply of a land with borders, but instead an enduring idea that within each of her citizens lies the ability to achieve greatness. And within this land, we are all granted, regardless of stature or means, a chance to make a better life, not only for ourselves, but for our children. For that is the American dream. This is a land still infantile in years, yet accomplished in its greatness and achievements. We are a nation of many, working as one, and though we may have our differences, when adversity and tragedy fall upon us, we come together like no other. In just 2 weeks, we must decide who shall be called upon as our next president to once again lead this land into prosperity and continued greatness. Many have called this election the most important of our time, with the very soul and fabric of who we are on the ballot. I believe this is true, which is why I'm speaking to you, each and every American, today. Sadly, the American media is no longer principled or credible, and for this reason, many facts are left unrevealed to the American public. Just a few short weeks ago, our nation initiated and helped secure the first Middle East peace agreement in 25 years. Our president received 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations for his role. Yet on one major news source and countless others, this incredible story was buried on page 4, their 37th most important story of the day, somehow falling behind importance how the Travis Scott meal was doing so well for McDonald's. And this week, a major news story broke on possible corruption at the highest level involving a candidate for president. Twitter and Facebook removed the story and froze accounts of those putting it out. In the town hall a few days ago, I wish I could quote some tiny number like 1 minute or 20 seconds of time that was devoted to this story, but I can't, for not one single question was ever asked on the subject or brought up. We as a public have been kept secluded from the truth, and today it is my goal to share with you information that has been withheld. One of the most important issues we face today is race relations and ensuring, as our founders intended, that men and women are created equal. Today, race plays a role in virtually every story we hear, yet the stories are told with an incredible misleading falsehood to ensure a narrative remains in play. That narrative, told by powerful elites, is that the Democrat Party is the party to lift up our black friends, family, and neighbors. Now, before you roll your eyes or think about clicking off, let me have one moment to prove this as fact. Forbes magazine produced a study that showed 19 of the top 20 most violent inner cities in the nation were run by Democrat mayors, and each of them has been for 30 years or more. In these cities, the poverty rate is triple the national average, and they have more than double the national average of homelessness. My hometown of Baltimore has not had a Republican mayor since 1967. In fact, not so much as a single city councilman has been Republican for over 20 years. Rats roam the streets and trash is not picked up. The homicide rate in Baltimore is higher than in El Salvador, a city people are fleeing to the United States for, citing violence as their reason for seeking asylum. Sadly, Baltimore is not even the most violent city, falling behind Detroit, Memphis, and Birmingham, all Democrat-run cities. A few months ago, an entire district of students in Baltimore failed math proficiency tests. Literally, not one single student in a district of schools passed. How can we expect these children to succeed with a failed education system? Donald Trump has been fighting for school choice, which would allow a parent to say, my child will not be the next failure, and allow that parent to send their child to a school that is performing and will give their son or daughter a shot at life. Joe Biden is against school choice. This is not opinion, this is fact.
I am not a charter school fan. The point is, if I'm president, from charter schools to this are gone.
I am calling upon members of both parties to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African American and Latino children.
President Trump signed funding legislation in September 2018 that increased funding for school choice by $42 million. In Detroit, 94.5% of minority students tested not proficient in either math or English. For over a half century, Democrat-run urban schools have robbed minority children of a realistic chance for a decent education. These districts are run by highly paid Democrat administrators whose foremost priority is catering to the demands of teachers' unions, one of the Democrat Party's most loyal constituencies. In 2016, teachers' unions gave $43 million to Democrats, $260,000 to Republicans. New York City Public Schools operate 16 reassignment centers, also known as rubber rooms. Rubber rooms are off-campus facilities where teachers accused of incompetence are placed, as their union-mandated appeals process drone on while receiving full pay. A 2010 investigation by LA Weekly found that the Los Angeles Unified School District paid over $3.5 million trying to fire 7 teachers for poor classroom performance. Despite blowing through enormous sums of educational funding, LA Public Schools graduated just 44% of their high school students, making it one of the worst performing school districts in America. Don't get me wrong, I love and have the utmost respect for teachers. But just like with police, when there's a bad apple, they need to be weeded out and removed, not protected. Now, this tells you that in recent history, essentially the last 50 years, the Democrat Party has made promise after promise to the black community, and at best has been woefully incompetent in providing any kind of step forward. And that's giving the benefit of the doubt. The truth is, I believe as racist President LBJ once said, the intent of the Democrat Party is to, quote, have those N-word folks voting Democrat for 200 years when explaining how he would do so by making the black community dependent upon welfare and unable to lift themselves from poverty. Which brings us to today. So if you know now the Democrat Party has failed the black community for decades, what do we do about it? Biden, we are told, will be the fighter for the black community, and Trump, we are told, is racist. But what if this was all a lie? In fact, to keep these powerful Democrat elites in power and keep the black community in check. Now, before we get started, we need to get one thing out of the way. Let's all agree. President Trump is, well, not what we're used to. He can be rude, arrogant, spiteful at times, and is certainly not what we envision or have seen in our history as presidential. But let me ask you, if you had a loved one with a serious medical situation and you had to choose between a doctor with compassionate tone and great bedside manner or an arrogant, matter-of-fact, but world-renowned and experienced expert to save your loved one's life, who would you choose? You see, when it comes to who needs to lead this nation, we need to choose on record and policy, not who smiles more and says nice things. So let's get started. Let's compare these two candidates without the filter of the news media. And let us start with Donald Trump. Prior to becoming president, Trump fought against the city of Miami and won when they would not allow Jews and blacks into private clubs. Trump presented Darnell Burton, a black bus driver who stopped someone from jumping off a bridge, a $10,000 check, just to say, good job, sir. When Jennifer Hudson's family was killed, Trump put her up in his hotel and gave his security instructions to keep paparazzi away from her. As president, Trump achieved the lowest black unemployment in United States history. Black home ownership rose over 2 points, and blacks opened more businesses than ever before. The hourly wage rose by the most it has in 16 years, and he doubled the child tax credit, putting that money into parents' pockets. President Trump is the first president in United States history to permanently fund HBCUs, or historically black colleges and universities, and he increased the levels of funding to them over and above what Obama-Biden had done. But that never made the news cycle. Trump also signed legislation forgiving Hurricane Katrina debt that threatened HBCUs. He made HBCUs a priority by creating the position of executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs. Trump received the Bipartisan Justice Award at a historically black college for his criminal justice reform accomplishments. Trump also began the long overdue process of criminal justice reform, passing the First Step Act, legislation that reforms sentencing laws that have wrongly and disproportionately harmed the African American community. The First Step Act gives nonviolent offenders the chance to re-enter society as productive, law-abiding citizens. Along these lines, Trump guaranteed clemency to black grandmother Alice Johnson, who was in jail on drug charges for over 20 years. Just 3 years earlier, when presented with Ms. Johnson's case, the administration of Obama-Biden denied the request. African American poverty rates hit all-time record lows in 2017 of 21.2%. Poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanic Americans have reached the lowest levels since the U.S. began collecting such data. Perhaps, most importantly, along with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, he created the Opportunity Zones Act, funding billions, with a B, into economically challenged inner cities through private investment in infrastructure, opening businesses, and creating jobs, offering a hand up instead of the left's continued handouts. Now, what does Trump propose for a second term? For starters, just last month, in a speech in Atlanta, Trump announced he would be designating the KKK officially as a federally recognized terrorist organization.
The president today designated Antifa and the KKK as terrorist organizations officially.
In that same speech, he announced his Platinum Plan for the black community, where he pledged increased access to capital to black businesses by almost $500 billion, which will create millions of new jobs for the black community and create 50,000 new black-owned businesses. He also pledged to make Juneteenth a national holiday, celebrating emancipation from slavery, and made lynching a hate crime. His Platinum Plan also includes initiatives to foster more prosperous African American communities by further increasing black home ownership, improving access to broadband, and developing easier pathways to credit. Finally, as part of this Platinum Plan, Trump introduced his Second Step Act, furthering his work on criminal justice reform that will create a national clemency project to right wrongful prosecutions and pardon individuals who have reformed their lives. As for Joe Biden being the champion of the black community, you may be in for a shock, but here goes. In 1975, Mr. Biden joined segregationist Jesse Helms, supporting a bill that would stop minority busing to schools. You may in fact recall in the Democrat debates, his now owned VP candidate, Kamala Harris, called him on this, famously with her "I was that little girl" speech.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Biden has said,
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
essentially saying black people are not capable of independent thought. Do as you're told, or I, the 80-year-old white guy, will take away your black card. This is a common line of thinking with VP Biden, as just a few months ago he said,
And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community.
apparently again voicing his opinion that all black people think alike. He has said worse. Did you know this year he said,
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
and last week he said when speaking about coronavirus,
The reason I was able to stay sequestered in my home is because some black woman was able to stack the grocery shelf.
his rhetoric is not just geared to the black community. This is the same man that said,
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking. Oh, gigantic.
and the man that said during remarks at the 40th anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation,
and talk about what was happening at home in terms of foreclosures, in terms of bad loans that were being, these Shylocks who took advantage of these women and men while overseas.
Oh boy, there you go again, Joe. Shylock, it specifically refers to Jewish bankers who take advantage of you. Don't do that. Don't do that.
The term Shylock is considered an anti-Semitic slur by the Anti-Defamation League, and Biden was rebuked by the group for using the slur, prompting Biden to publicly apologize for his poor choice of words. This is also the same mentality you see when he said about President Obama.
The first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man.
Apparently, the other black men that have run for president, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Carol Moseley Braun, and Alan Keyes, were not clean or articulate enough for Joe's liking. Now, back to that busing vote of Vice President Biden's back in 1975, his quote then was, "Where is the media outrage on this quote and the others I cited? It's nowhere, because they are manipulating us to believe what they need us to believe, so they can remain in power and in control of the money." But that's all icing on the cake, as they say. Joe Biden proudly authored the 1994 crime bill that disproportionately put millions of black men in prison, period. As per his running mate Kamala Harris, she literally withheld evidence in a death penalty case that later proved the man innocent, to which she said, "I feel really bad about it." Probably not quite as bad as the innocent man or his loved ones, I imagine. Harris, as DA for California, also put over 1,500 black men in prison for smoking marijuana. Under her administration, the incarceration rate for black men was over 10 times their white counterparts. And she's on record telling her boss that we should keep prisoners in longer sentences as they provide a cheap source of labor for the state.
Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And
My God, look at Maxine Waters or Nancy Pelosi's home and their districts. They live in million-dollar gated homes with private security you and I can only dream about. Yet mere blocks away, the very people voting for them live in streets covered in feces and used needles, eating dinner from trash dumpsters. It's criminal and inhumane. To conclude, we've talked just about one topic today. There are many more. Coronavirus is very important. The economy, infrastructure, our military. All this information can be found on the link below, and I hope you will go ahead and take a look at it. As I stated in the beginning, this is the most important election of our time. It's not a time to be on the sidelines. Please do the research. Find out the information you need to vote for the candidate that best suits your life and our American dream. For we are all in this together. This is the time to get out and vote. On November 3rd, please make sure you do that. God bless you, and God bless America.